Thank you for joining us today for this press briefing on ways private citizens can help Ukraine defeat Russian aggression, hosted by Spirit of America. I'm Chaz Martin, Director of International Communications for Spirit of America. Today's speakers include Spirit of America founder and CEO Jim Hake, retired General Phil Breedlove, and Spirit of America's Regional Manager for Europe, Matt Dimmick. Our speakers will be giving brief presentations and then take your questions. So please write any questions you have in the Q&A box. And we'll start with our CEO, Jim Hake.
Thank you, Chaz, and thanks everybody for joining. I'll give a little background on Spirit of America and what we've been doing in Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in February of last year. Spirit of America has been active in helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression since 2014. We're a unique, privately funded nonprofit. We work alongside U.S. troops and diplomats all over the world to support U.S. national security interests and to get citizens involved in preserving the promise of a free and better life. So as I said, we are privately funded. We are also not neutral, which in the world of nonprofits and non-governmental organizations is a fairly unique thing as well. So that means we take America's side. We take the side of freedom and democracy. And right now, with U.S. military and State Department personnel, we are taking Ukraine's side. A way to think about what we do is that we, in working with those who serve, we fill the gaps between what's needed and what government can do. Since the full-scale invasion last year, we have been focused on providing non-lethal assistance to help Ukraine win. And that is maybe an unconventional way to define humanitarian, but in our view, the most humanitarian thing anyone can do is help stop the suffering at its source. And what that means is helping Ukraine defeat Russia, help Ukraine win, and more broadly, help the causes of freedom and democracy in the world. So to date, for non-lethal assistance in Ukraine, we have raised over $65 million and provided hundreds of tons in non-lethal assistance. But I have to say that measuring the assistance we provided in tonnage is a kind of a poor way to do it. The most important things that we've done can't really be measured by their weight. And I'll mention one of those in just a second. So we raised, as I said, $65 million, and we've been pretty quiet about what we've done. And there are a variety of reasons for that. But I'm going to explain why we're raising $200 million and why we're talking with you all about it. The first thing is to understand our perspective, not just our perspective, but what's at stake in Ukraine and in the war with Russia. It's really much more about Ukraine. It really is about the future of freedom and democracy in the world. And General Breedlove will be speaking to that a little bit more in a moment. But just a good way to think about it is that we're going to live with the consequences for generations. And as a thought experiment, you could look at what would the world be like today if we lost World War II? And that's a good way to think about what's at stake. And that's beyond the tremendous humanitarian consequences happening in Ukraine every day. So the second is why we're talking about this with you all now. And we provided a range of non-lethal assistance early in the war. A lot of that was focused on supporting broad-scale mobilization in Ukraine. We provided thousands and thousands of level 4 body armor and ballistic helmets, enough to equip the equivalent of every U.S. Navy SEAL, every Army Ranger, and every Marine Special Operator. So we were providing that assistance on scale. We provided vehicles and 50-passenger buses to support mobilization. And coming into this fall, we had a recent visit. Well, I just got back last night. Matt is still in the region now. But in late August, we took a trip over to Germany, Poland, and Ukraine. The main question in my mind was, how much of a difference could Spirit of America with private assistance make on the outcome of the war? And at what scale and speed would we need to operate to be able to make that difference? And the short answer, and I knew that every dollar we spent based on our relationship with the US and Ukrainian military would be spent to good effect, but I didn't know how much of a difference it could actually make on the outcome. The short answer is the private assistance that we're talking about today, and the reason we're raising $200 million, and the reason we're talking to you all about it is that support, that private assistance can be the difference that makes a difference on the outcome of the war. Here's one example that we learned about at the end of August. We had provided in the spring and May about $600,000 of communications equipment, laptops, mobile phones, tablets, to operationalize a secure communication network that the Ukrainian military uses to coordinate its efforts on the front line. And we provided that equipment to test one aspect to test that system with one a part of the Ukrainian military in the lead on the counteroffensive in Zaporizhia. What we learned at the end of August was that $600,000 investment had, at the time we heard about this, had resulted in the destruction of $1.9 billion in Russian weapon systems. Today, that figure is $3.1 billion. So that is an investment of $600,000 that led to that outcome. And that's what we think about as a real asymmetric impact. So that is just one of the initiatives that we're scaling up. We need to raise, we've raised about $10 million towards scaling that up thus far. We need about another $25 million to be able to get that to full operational capacity. That's just one thing that we're doing. And Matt's going to talk to you a little bit more about that. So that is why we are having this call today. There are Americans we know, because I talk to them every day, who want to help Ukraine win. They understand what's at stake, but they don't know that there's a legal, compliant, and accountable way that can have an off-scale impact to actually help Ukraine. And that's what we represent, and that's why we're kicking this off today. So I'm going to turn things over to General Phil Breedlove and then to Matt Dimmick. I think you all know General Breedlove. He was the Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, the commander of U.S. European Command, answering directly to the U.S. President and to NATO's governing body. He also serves on Spirit of America's Board of Advisors, and thank you for that, General. Matt Dimmick is a retired Army colonel. Most of his career was spent as a foreign area officer focused on the Russia threat. His last assignment was as Russia director on the National Security Council, where he served as the president's principal advisor on Russia from 2019 to 2021. And Matt is now our program manager for Europe and our Ukraine assistance lead. So you're going to hear from the two of them. We'll come back for questions and so forth. I think the housekeeping piece is if you do have questions, please submit them on the Q&A via the Q&A function, the button on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll do our best to get to everybody. So General Breedlove, over to you.
Well, Jim, thanks for setting this up so well. It is an interesting time. We are challenged now by voices that are saying that we should curtail or lessen our support to Ukraine. Much of that is trapped in this conversation about what we also have to do for Israel. And so I think it's important to remember that Ukraine does matter. Morally, we in the West do not stand for a situation where a world superpower can amass its army, march across internationally recognized borders, and subjugate its neighbor. And we should be cognizant of that's exactly what happened in 08, in 14, and now in 22 as Russia has continued in its bad behavior. Secondarily, few in America actually understand how important Ukraine is to the world and its economy and in grain and other things that it contributes. A highly technical nation that builds wonderful space motors, wonderful aircraft engines, and other things that are important to the West. Often I'm asked, how does this war end? And my answer surprises some. This war will end exactly how Western policymakers want it to end. If Western policymakers decide to lessen their support for Ukraine, Ukraine will fight valiantly, but will lose and be subjugated or re-subjugated by Russia. If we don't change what we're doing now, Ukraine will eventually also lose. The West will wither away from its support. Russia will outlast us, which is its real goal at this point. They know they can't militarily defeat Ukraine. And so if we continue to only supply them what they need to stay on the battlefield, rather than supplying them what they need to win, then eventually Ukraine will lose the support of the West and will succumb once again to Russia's aggression. The third option I discuss all the time is that the West gives Ukraine what it needs to win this war. That would be pretty easily described by what would we take to the war. And if you would give me time in the questions and answers, I'd love to describe that. But if the West were to supply Ukraine what it actually needs to win, we have seen in the early parts of this war on the northwest side of Kyiv, on the north and northwest side of Kharkiv, strategic defeats of the Russian military. In the south now, verging on an operational level defeat of the Russian military in many places. And so I would advocate that we would make those policy decisions to give Ukraine what it needs to move forward. And then finally, I would like to just jump on something that Jim alluded to in the beginning. It is a time where funding is important. And yes, we have to advocate with our government for funding, for continued funding at a level that would allow Ukraine to win, not merely remain on the battlefield. And that funding of the government needs our advocacy. As importantly is exactly what this organization does. And that is private entities funding extremely critical capabilities for use by a very brave nation that is defending its very existence against a world superpower that is hell-bent on removing that sovereignty and that existence as an independent nation. And so it's important that we do exactly what we're advocating for here. And that is to reach out to America and encourage America to invest in something that is paying measurable dividends through its contributions here. I look forward to your questions.
Matt, over to you.
Thanks. What I would like to just spend a couple minutes highlighting is that the key observation that I have taken away from doing all this work over the past months with the Ukrainians is just the fact that we get to see their incredible bravery and commitment of all the Ukrainians on the front lines that we work with directly. And they have no illusions that they're in a long, tough, and brutal fight, but they've made it very clear to us that they don't want us to come over and do their fighting for them. Their will to fight is strong, and they will keep fighting for as long as it takes and for as long as they have the means to do it. And we've seen this since the very beginning. When we worked closely with the Territorial Defense Force citizen soldiers who they answered the call in the very first hours of the war. These troops were shopkeepers, mechanics, office workers, and the like, and they did not hesitate to drop what they were doing and join up. They were working one day and then manning fighting positions the next day, facing down Russian armor and artillery. And as you may know, that force ballooned in size overnight, faster than they could possibly be equipped. So those TDF troops, civilians one day, soldiers the next, out of sheer necessity, went straight to the front lines with basically just the shirts on their back and hardly any equipment, with a rifle and directions towards the front. And we were proud to have helped support those brave men and women with thousands of sets of body armor and other essential tactical gear at a critical time in their defense. Territorial Defense Forces subsequently shared with us that Spirit of America equipment that they received ended up outfitting a significant portion of their frontline troops in the early phase of the war, while Ukraine waited for other equipment streams to emerge. We've also assisted some of the top tier elements of the Ukrainian Special Forces, and they have demonstrated incredible bravery and determination in the face of long odds. In a discussion with our U.S. colleagues when we were in a training rotation where a Ukrsoft unit was getting trained earlier this spring in the region outside of Ukraine, we learned about the unimaginably high risks that these operators take as they operate in, around, and behind Russian lines. You know, for one thing, these special operators who are up there doing some of the most important work, when they are extremely vulnerable and they're observable to Russian thermal drones, which are ever present on the front lines. And if they are detected, they likely face a barrage of artillery within minutes of getting spotted. And additionally, if they do get wounded, they know it takes hours to get evacuated, and the chances are high that even survivable serious wounds will result in their death because of the remoteness of medical care. And, by the Ukrainians' own estimate from the ones we talked to, they were certain that 50% of them would not return from their next deployment. And we were absolutely humbled by what these men were taking on, willingly knowing the incredible costs that they would bear. And they bore those willingly. And fortunately, we've been able to fill some of the equipment gaps that help protect some of those brave special operators. We've been able to tailor deliveries of some invaluable gear that makes them nearly invisible to Russian drones and thermal cameras. We also purchased advanced trauma kits that help stabilize and treat wounded to carry them through the long evacuation path to higher level medical care. And we sent in dozens of rugged and versatile pickup trucks that speed their wounded back to the friendly lines. So with additional funding, we hope to scale up that effort so that every Ukrainian special forces troop in all of their special missions units can go into the fight with the gear they need to perform better, survive longer, and come home in the end. So, those are some of the reasons we have such deep respect for the Ukrainians who are fighting and sacrificing every day. They know the cost of this war firsthand, yet they continue to press forward with what they have in hand, even though in many cases they never come close to having all the force protection, the mobility, or the medical needs to satisfy all their requirements. And, honestly, that's a big gap we're attempting to fill with our work, getting the most effective tools into the hands of those who have the most impact over moving the needle toward victory, and finding the means to help Ukrainians exploit those tools in asymmetric ways. And with the type of focus or support we have in mind, combined with the scale to make them incredibly impactful, we honestly think we can help Ukraine preserve thousands of lives and shorten this war. And with that, over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, General Breedlove. Again, submit questions through the Q&A function. We have a few here, so I'll start with one. General Breedlove, I'm going to pass this over to you. The question is, putting aside what Ukraine's allies might or might not do, do you see any way that Ukraine can break the current deadlock? And Matt, I'm going to come to you after General Breedlove on this. And how would you characterize the strategic choices that Ukrainian commanders are wrestling with as we head into winter? So General Breedlove, you first, please.
Well, Mark, thanks for the question. I love it because I hate these words that are being used these days, like stalemate and deadlock. I'm not attacking your word personally, but I think that what we see is, as the winter approaches, first the muddy part of the winter and then the frozen part of the winter, there will be a distinct change in the tempo and type of land operations. But I don't believe that signifies that Ukraine has stopped moving forward. Think about what Ukraine has done in the Black Sea. They've essentially taken the northern Black Sea away from the Russian Navy. The Russian Navy has moved west and northwest to get away from the attacks of the Ukrainians. Just 2 days ago now, I believe the Ukrainians used their naval drones to sink 2 landing crafts of the Russians. And so the fight continues. It just continues in different shape. Additionally, on the land, Ukraine is gradually getting close enough to begin to bring short-range artillery fire to bear on the land bridge, which again is going to change things. So I don't buy the words that are being used to discourage those words of deadlock and stalemate. I think that Ukraine is taking the fight to Russia in a different way. Oh, by the way, Russia will do what they have always done. They will use the drones from Iran and other long-range capabilities from North Korea and other ways to strike into Ukraine. And so they'll have their own winter offensive. It will be via rocket attack. So how do Ukrainians wrestle with what's next? The most important strategic thing that would affect the Ukrainians is for the United States and other large policy capitals to state that their policy is that they are there until Ukraine regains its sovereign territory. We see our government relate its policy by saying we'll be there as long as it takes, or we'll give them everything they need. So let me assure you that military planners see both of those sentences as incomplete. We'll be there as long as it takes to do what? We'll give them everything they need to do what? The to do what needs to be clearly stated by our government: to defeat Russian forces and expel them from sovereign Ukrainian lands, and that includes Crimea.
Matt, anything you would like to add to that?
I think just a couple of things. One, the Ukrainians have to preserve the lives of their soldiers, and they value the lives of their soldiers, unlike those those commanders on the Russian side. So they can't play an attrition game with the Russians, but they have the means and the skill and the cleverness to be able to play a different game. And what they need to do is hold the Russians by the nose on the front line, and then do what they're doing right now at larger scale, which is attrit and degrade Russian forces in depth. And destroy high-value targets that the Russians need to be able to stay in the field and support those frontline troops. So I think you're going to see the Ukrainians throughout the next few months continue to pummel the Russians' logistics points, fuel points, command and control points, air defense, counter battery. You're going to see those systems steadily disappear, and you're going to hear about Russian commanders through their Telegram channels and otherwise complain bitterly about how poorly they are able to keep their troops in the field. And at some point, the Russians are going to be weakened enough that when the Ukrainians do find breakthroughs in those front lines, they're going to find a very brittle and degraded Russian force in front of them. And I think that's going to be their key to victory.
And along those lines, I'll just add that with the Spirit America's investment in the secure communication system that I mentioned earlier, it's resulted in over $3 billion worth of Russian weapon systems destroyed. Those weapons, the destruction of those weapon systems, don't get the attention of movements that movements on the front lines do, but it's critical to Ukraine's ability to prevail in this conflict. And so that's been happening, I'll say largely, what's certainly been happening behind the front lines. Those weapon systems are in the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in value, extremely hard to replace. And those are the things that are protecting the Ukrainian ground forces. So that is one thing that we're not hearing a lot about, understandably. It's not quite as dramatic as some of the other areas of progress, but that is happening. And those are where, that's the main area where, one of the main areas where Spirit America's focused its investment. Next question. It's that about 20 ATACMS, the missiles have been sent to Ukraine. How many would Ukraine need to have a significant impact, General? And then Matt, over to you as well.
Well, it's important to know, and these are not my words, but I've kind of adopted them. We have done like we have on so many other things in this war. We use this creeping incrementalism as our approach. It's taken us forever to convince that ATACMS were important. When they decided to send ATACMS, they sent a limited number of the oldest type of ATACMS, which are actually shorter range ATACMS. Rather than putting a number on ATACMS, I would just offer that the way to really make a difference in this war, especially vis-a-vis Crimea, is to attack Crimea in depth, pervasively, persistently, and precisely. Bring all of the military targets in the Crimea under threat and attack. And after that, closing the land bridge and the Kerch Strait bridge by using the high explosive unitary warhead, which is a much longer ATACMS, and deny that bridge perpetually. Once you do that, this war will significantly change. And so rather than put a number, just remembering that what we want to do is pervasively, persistently, and precisely attack the depth, the entire depth of Crimea with ATACMS, and this will change the face of Russia in Ukraine.
Thank you, General. So Matt, I'm going to get to a different question for you. It's about how Spirit of America identifies needs and what are the next set of things that are needed, and how we're going to spend $200 million to help Ukraine win. Before you answer that one, I'll just note for everyone that Spirit of America operates under a unique agreement as a private organization, a unique agreement with the Department of Defense, an agreement that allows the U.S. military to talk to us, to identify needs, to collaborate, to receive and distribute assistance, and to provide logistical support. So Matt, over to you on how needs are identified and what is needed now and how we're going to use those funds.
Thanks, Jim. That's a great question. And, I really think Spirit of America's superpower is the agreement that we have with the Department of Defense. It allows us to collaborate and cooperate. And that's where we get our best value when it comes to figuring out what the situation in Ukraine is, how to get connected with our Ukrainian colleagues and identify from a strategic view what exactly are the U.S. national interests here, what the U.S. is trying to do to help Ukraine win. And we get a much clearer and much broader picture by doing that. We've got excellent relationships with various U.S. headquarters across the breadth and depth of the parts of the U.S. government that are working on Ukraine and helping Ukraine win. And that has really keyed us into a number of what I consider to be ultra high payoff targets that we would not have found out about if we had been searching on our own, or if we had been doing an ad hoc method of seeking out different opportunities. So that really has been the key to us getting information about what the highest payoff needs are and where our particular brand of tailored and targeted support can have immense payoffs. So as we've been working on those projects, we have focused on a number of areas. One is the Ukrainian special forces are an incredibly asymmetric tool in the hands of Ukrainian armed forces. And as I described earlier, they need every possible non-lethal means at their disposal to help unlock their potential, get more of their teams in the field, keep more teams alive, and bring them back. Another category that we have been introduced to by the U.S. forces that they are very enthusiastic about is a system that allows Ukrainians to talk securely, plan securely, communicate across boundaries, and really accelerates their ability to prosecute the war and get inside of Russia's decision-making cycle in ways that are having an extremely tangible impact on the battlefield. And then there are other pieces of equipment that are very high payoff that are helping the Ukrainians protect their high-value systems and confuse the Russians about what the Ukrainians are doing. And we are focusing on that line of effort as well.
Thank you, Matt. And we're just about at time. So I'm say a couple of things in closing. The thing that was my question going into the time in Germany, Poland, and Ukraine that I mentioned at the end of August was, can private assistance be the difference that makes the difference in Ukraine in this war? And the answer is yes, but it has to be at the right speed and the right scale. That's why we're raising $200 million to be able to provide exactly what is needed in cooperation with our U.S. military and Ukrainian military partners to have that asymmetric impact on this conflict. So toward that $200 million goal, we've raised over $26 million to date since the beginning of September. And that has come in amounts from $10, individual donations from $10 to $10 million, and a lot of points in between. And the thing that is absolutely the case is that there are Americans who want to affect the outcome of this war who don't know that it's possible to do it. And that's what we represent. We've been doing this, working alongside U.S. military personnel around the world for 20 years in different theaters, in some cases in conflict, some cases in stabilization operations, in other cases to support partners who were in the lead in the fight to defend the free world. So Spirit of America is at spiritofamerica.org. There's more information on what we're doing there. Most of the information would best be shared with you all privately. And we're happy to do that, working through our friends at Plus Communications. So with that, we are at time. General Breedlove, thank you. Matt, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thanks everybody for joining. Just to wrap, everyone that participated in this call and called in will receive a link to a video recording. So you'll be receiving that shortly today. Also, again, you'll see additional information on our website, www.spiritofamerica.org, for all information about our programming. And if you have additional questions, please do reach back directly to Plus Communication, which coordinated the call, regarding any follow-up questions. Thank you.